Welcome to Launch One with Mason Springer. I'm Mason Springer, and today we're joined by Tristan Litke, founder of Precision Cut Archery. He's heavily involved in the Arrow Ballistics Study, bowhunter, and this guy knows his stuff when it comes to arrows, ballistics, software, numbers, stuff like that. I've already learned a ton of them working with him to get this podcast rolling, and I think this is going to be a great conversation. But Tristan, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, this is round 3 of trying to get this recorded, I think.
Something
And I
like that.
decided before we started, no pressure, but if this doesn't work, I'm shutting down the website, shutting down the Instagram. I'm going back into the cave I came from. So better get this one recorded.
Yeah, yeah, which it seems like he's going good. We're using a different program, so hopefully it goes pretty smoothly, but I don't see any issues so far, so we should be good.
No, I'm just
But
kidding. It's all good. I know how that stuff goes. I know better than probably most people how fickle technology can be.
yes,
So
absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about we'll start with kind of precision cut because the whole reason I kind of, sent you an invitation to come on here was I got the precision cut software probably been at least a month and a half ago now. And, a friend of mine like made me a tape with it and it was like really accurate right off the bat. And I'm like, well, there's still a lot of stuff I can, do to make it better. And then I just went home and took the measurements. It's super simple. And then got these crazy accurate tapes. And so that instantly impressed me, with the precision cut end of things. And so I'm like, oh, I got to get this guy on the podcast. And then, come to find out you do stuff with the Arrow Ballistics Study and, know a bunch of stuff, bunch of people in the industry. But yeah, so as far as precision cut goes, I made a few tapes with it, and I know you guys just came out with a new update, but kind of give me a brief overview of what precision cut is, what it does, and what kind of separates it from the competition.
yeah, so I think the easiest way to think about precision cut archery is it is a ballistic software for archers. So it's very similar in concept to any of the rifle ballistic software. If any of you guys are into like long range rifle shooting type stuff, like the target's at 1200 yards, I need to dial my scope to these many mils or this many MOA. Like it's the same exact thing, but we're doing that for archery. Which there's been programs like that in existence since the dawn of time where people have been making sight tapes for. And really the premise from the get-go is how can we skip all of the like playing around, tweaking things? Like, can't we just put in accurate data and get an accurate sight tape or accurate sight marks or accurate cuts? Like, can't we just get to that with the right data instead of having to like fiddle around? And because that's kind of what, pretty much every other program turned into if you were at the highest level. And a lot of the, professional guys have talked about that forever. Like, well, if your middle marks are off, you tweak your sight height or whatever was like a common thing that, people would say. So kind of way back when, 2023 is when this kind of all started. And like obviously like everything makes sense, looking backwards, and you can kind of see how the pieces, like how the pieces of my life like came together to, now I have like a business that has customers that pay me to make site tapes. But that was like never really the original plan, or like it just kind of, one step at a time happened. And I think if I had to distill that down, it's like, and this is probably good advice for any of like the younger audience who are like trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, or like what do they want to go in for work and all that, is like step one, you have to find something you're intensely interested in. Because if you're interested in it, you will work harder on it. Like the work feels like play. So you'll work on it all the time and you'll work on it more than anyone else will. And then all of a sudden are farther along than the person who, isn't interested in that thing. So that's like step one. And that's really what archery was for me. I just kind of got bitten really hard by the archery bug, and not from a like competitive perspective. I've never really shot a real tournament. I've shot like local leagues and things like that, but I'm really coming at it from the bow hunting side. I got really into kind of Western bow hunting. I'm from Minnesota, so grew up kind of whitetail hunting. And then after I graduated school and got a job and started making money, I really got into the Western stuff, started doing that. And it's just kind of been one thing after another on that side. But anyway, yeah, had this kind of bow hunting passion, the thing that you do all year round, you're preparing all year. Then at the time, I was hunting, a lot in the fall. Like the way my job was, I could work. I worked in manufacturing facilities doing kind of IT network type stuff in these manufacturing facilities, and a lot of our work was on holidays and weekends throughout the year. And the way that company worked is I could like cash all my time. Like every weekend I worked was like a day in my PTO bank that then I would spend in the fall. So I would store up like, 40, 50 days of time off. And then in the fall, I would go to the mountains for, a month or two at a time kind of thing. And so
Wow.
did that starting kind of 2019, just for kind of reference. That was kind of 2019-ish time frame. So not super long ago. Was doing that. My buddy Brad, who I shot league with, he started a company called Bow Bars in 2020. I believe it was 2023, like summer 2023. And we had been shooting league together and stuff like that all winter. And I kind of reignite or like reignited his interest in archery. And so he got like a new bow and was starting to shoot a lot and was starting to get better than me, which made me mad. And then he started this company making bow vices and just kind of on a whim. Well, I guess I don't know if it was a whim, but just kind of I don't know, just kind of for fun, just kind of to like learn the business side of things, whatever. And it's like, oh, that seems kind of cool. What could I do that like would be, I don't know, interesting from that side? And it just kind of like dawned on me like, oh man, like archery software is really in a rough spot right now. I feel like I could make something that is much, much better than what exists. So around that time frame, just started messing around with some of the math and like learning how, I mean, really learning how software development works. Like I'd started to kind of edge that way in my career wise. Like now I'm pretty much doing full-time software development, but at the time I was just kind of starting that. So yeah, kind of learning the development side. It took probably 6 months to have something to where like, okay, I think this works. Like this seems to work for me. I'm not the best shooter in the world by any means, but it was to the point where like I need to get this in the hands of some people who can actually shoot and tell me if this is right or if this works. And at the time I didn't have any kind of like an Instagram. I had like an old Facebook from like high school kind of thing that I hadn't touched in years. And I was like, "Okay, well, how do I find people who could, like, tell me if this works or not?" And I was aware of, people in the industry. I listened to every podcast just through my Western bow hunting obsession. I very much followed archery. I watched every tournament on the TV, like, I knew who was who and all that. I listened to every podcast, and I knew that Tim talked a lot about this. Tim Gillingham talked a lot about how to kind of dial in sight tapes, and talked about how like you have to go shoot in cut charts and like kind of all this stuff that a lot of people didn't talk about. So I ended up making a kind of business Instagram. Had like probably 2 followers, like probably my wife and buddy or something. And I shot Tim a message. I was like, "Hey Tim, working on this thing. Would you be interested in giving this a try?" And right away he fired back, "Oh yeah, absolutely, I'll give it a try." I was like, "Oh, cool. I don't even have a website that you can go to yet, but tell you what, send me your specs, and I'll send you back a sight tape." So he sent me his like the measurements that you entered today, the peep to arrow and the peep to pin and all the stuff, his speed, and then he shot in like a whatever it was, a 50 and a 100 or whatever. Mark sent me all that stuff. I sent him back a PDF through Instagram and he printed it out and tried it. He's like, "Holy crap, this is dead on at every single range." And it's like, boom, I knew I had something that was at least the start of something that would work. So ended up, like actually getting the website live, started reading like marketing books and like business books and try, okay, like I have a product. How do I like make people aware that this exists? Sort of stuff. And yeah, just kind of been one thing after another. And here we are, 3-ish. It's probably been just about exactly 3 years since that started. And yeah,
Yeah.
here we are talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely you're right on the money where, as long as you get your numbers right that you plug into the system, like that tape just comes out accurate. Like there's none of the fiddling, the tweaking, like none of that, which is, it makes it really nice. And I know you're always rolling out like updates for the website too. I saw something online the other day about, like updates on highlights, and I don't even know what all was changed, but just bunch of stuff you're tweaking, make it a little bit better. And then I
Yeah,
also
I mean,
saw on the
that's
web.
like literally, I mean, for sure every week, if not like most days, there's some like whether it's a fix or especially now, like now, if at the beginning, when I had like 10 customers, if there was an issue, that issue might live there forever, like for months and until I discovered it myself. Now, today, like if I have something wrong and there's a bug somewhere and something doesn't work, like I get 20 messages like the first day that's live. So updates are always pushing updates, especially now with the mobile app stuff, is really rough because mobile apps are super fickle and like just weird. Like stuff behaves differently on Android than it does on iPhone. So like, yeah, I'm always pushing, bug fixes and tweaks and updates. And then yeah, intermixed in there, there's like true kind of real like kind of I guess new features or new things. And yeah, that was one of the ones you saw like last week was like highlights and just kind of a sight tape setting overhaul, more customization, short range marks right on the sight tape, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
uh, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just I mean, that's the name of the game in software, right? It's like how fast can you iterate and improve the thing? And
Mm.
I guess that's really how we've gotten here. Like it'd be really fun to go back. I should pull it up someday, and like I should spin up like a old Precision Cut Archery website just so people can log in and see what it used to look like. Because it used to look like trash. It was terrible. Like the first like probably year, 2 years. I mean, even if I went and looked at the version 6 months ago, I'd probably think it's just garbage. And it was. But you do the best you could at the time, and I'll look back a year from now and say the version that we have today is garbage. But so yeah, it's all just continuing to improve it. That's how it goes.
Yeah, I know the first tape I made, like, with the program that I had bought was for Field Nationals in Yankton. And Field, if you haven't shot that before, it's not very common in America. It's really big over in Europe. Like, Field is their equivalent to 3D here. So, Field shoot is basically like a 3D shoot, maybe even like a tack shoot, but where you're shooting spots. So, some pretty crazy uphill, downhill shots. A lot of times you're judging the distance, so it's pretty fun, but your tape has to be right on the money, because you're shooting, sometimes you're shooting really close range at really steep uphill, downhill angles. And like, I remember there was even a shot where I had to set my indicator like above the highest mark on my sight tapes. Like, it was
Mm,
just a crazy shot like that. But I know that, like the cut charts that I printed off from your site, I ended up like shooting them in throughout the tournament, and yeah, they were like right on the money, and that was important to have. I've like other programs I've used, like you print off a cut chart, and I'm pretty sure it's just like a generic cut chart for every setup. I don't think it's like customized for your setup, which is one thing that it definitely makes a difference having it for your setup. But I think another thing I noticed on your site was up at the top it says, you've got site tapes, and then in beta was like build, something that said build. What is
yep.
that exactly?
Yeah, so that's been in beta for probably like 2 years, and I just haven't circled back to actually kind of fleshing it out. But the premise is so there's 2 tabs. If you will go to the website, there's 2 tabs. There's ballistics, which is kind of the core suite of functionality that everyone's used to, sight tapes and cut charts and sight marks and kind of all this stuff that I like to think of it's the stuff that helps you like if you have a bow and arrow setup, it's all of the stuff that helps you get the most accuracy out of that setup. So, like the real time, like I have this set up and I want to, make a site tape for it, etc. The build side, the idea behind the build side is I am building a brand new arrow for my brand new bow to go hunt elk or to shoot ASA or to shoot field or whatever I might be doing and being able to like tweak things and see how that affects that build's kind of theoretical performance. Not necessarily how well you shoot it, but how forgiving is that arrow to range forgiveness arrows or errors, like hunting. You have a range on a mule deer, he takes 3 steps. Now you're guessing on the yardage. How far can you be off on that guess and still catch the vitals? That's a really important thing. That's why speed is important, you know, on the hunting side because you need to be able to be off or like you catch the blade of grass that's right in front of them with your rangefinder. So now your range is 3 yards off. Do you still catch vitals or do you miss low? So there's that side of it. There's like wind performance. So, the downside of light and fast is that a heavy arrow is always going to drift less in the wind. So like being able to basically like build out a couple different theoretical arrows and compare how those arrows are going to behave downrange for the things that you care about was basically the premise of that. And that's the main thing. It's I think we call it like the arrow weight optimization page where it's basically that you type in a couple different arrow weights and you can see how the different performance metrics varies. The heavier arrows are better in some ways, the lighter arrows are better in some ways, and it's up to you to decide which one is important for the use case that you have. And then we do have a spine recommendation feature that's pretty much similar. Like it's just an easier spine chart, basically, which we can get into this too. But I think the idea of a spine chart is kind of like an outdated concept, at least for like modern compounds. And we kind of prove that in the Arrow Ballistics Study this year. But in any case, that's a starting point for people who have no idea. I have a new bow. I need to choose an arrow spine. What do I choose? That's a reasonable starting point, just like kind of a manufacturer's spine chart is.
Yeah. Yeah. So what makes you say that a manufacturer's spine chart can be outdated?
So I guess first, it's probably important to talk about like what do we mean when we say an arrow is properly spined for a bow? Like, what would you say if I said, "Hey, what does it mean for an arrow to be properly spined to that bow?"
For me, it would be that the arrow, I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of hard to explain, but I'd say the arrow is forgiving, right? Forgiving in air quotes. You want an arrow that's forgiving, and a lot of people agree that that has to do with spine. But you've got stiff arrows, you got weak arrows, you've got optimum arrows. But that optimum point is some people say it's on the stiffer end, some people say it's on the weaker end, and sometimes to get that the most forgiveness is, I guess, per person. There's no real universal like cheat sheet as far as I'm aware of. It's
Yeah.
kind of a whatever works for you thing.
Yeah, so I think excluding the really, really top tier competitive archer thing, where they're either like well, like they are chasing that thing that behaves the best given their specific nuances in their shot. It's like everyone has like we're not a machine. Everyone has like errors that they tend to make or things like that. And so there's probably some combination of bow and arrow that like reacts in the least bad way to that archer's specific thing. So that's kind of one side of the coin, which is probably a little bit more fuzzy than what I would kind of define proper spine as, at least for the general kind of population. And I
And
would
this
say
is
it,
this is compound bows too. Recurve's a whole
yes,
nother animal.
a whole different thing because the recurve thing, like it has to react to the way that you're releasing the arrow, and for like more like trad bows, it has to like paradox around the riser correctly. Totally different conversation. Yeah, like that. Those arrows have to be, and like really, it all comes down to we want an arrow that comes out of the bow straight, excluding the really high end competitive side where they're even maybe like tuning their bow to not a bullet hole because it shoots better for them. But like just take like not the 99% of people who are, maybe they're hunters and like you kind of need your bow to shoot a bullet hole in order for it to group broadheads and whatever. So I guess the premise of like from like recurve and compound is like we want an arrow that comes out of the bow straight, meaning the arrow's coming out straight. It's not like tail left, it's not tail right, up down, etc. Excluding the really high end compound, or I guess any competitive person who's tweaking things for their specific nuances of their shot. So goal is arrow coming out of the bow straight. And in the past, and with recurves, like recurves, longbows, all that, like the only lever you have to change that is the spine of the arrow. Like you can't really change much else on like a longbow other than the arrow spine to change how that arrow. I mean, you can kind of change like your like plunger tension and some of that stuff a little bit, but nothing like we can on modern compound. So a modern compound, we can move cam position often, like inside the limb. We can on like the Hoyt XTS now, we can change the deflection of the individual limbs. We can do all kinds of things to essentially tune the bow to the arrow, which has been a thing that people have kind of said not to do forever, which they've said tune the arrow to the bow, meaning change the dynamic spine reaction of the arrow so that it ends up launching straight out of the bow. That's where the whole like I forget which it is. Tail left is stiff and tail right is weak for like a
Yeah.
compound archer. That's kind of where that whole thing came from because the compound bow, when you drop back, the cables load the cable guard. It torques the bow. So every compound bow has some amount of torque, meaning every compound bow has some amount of lateral string travel. And the arrow has to, for lack of a better term, absorb that lateral string travel and still come out of the bow straight. So all that to say, I think that's a big reason why spine charts came to exist. Well, there's two reasons. One is a safety perspective, because arrow manufacturers don't want you shooting a 450 spine out of their 90-pound bow, because that would be a little bit scary.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's one side. The safety side is for sure a reason that they came to be, especially in like this kind of all came from like the speed era where everyone's chasing the crazy speeds and all that. So if you could just like go way weak in spine and be way lighter, that probably would have been a thing that people would have for sure done. So I think arrow manufacturers we gotta do some kind of recommendation here so people don't, go crazy on that. And then the other side of it is a general rule of thumb for given the power strokes of the bows of the time, what spine tends to launch out of the bow straight. Given, on some of the old single cams and things, you had a lot of vertical knock travel. Every compound bow has horizontal knock travel in some degree. So how can we, what's kind of the rough area of arrow that tends to shoot out of the bows of the day straight? And I would argue, based on this year, and surprisingly, so like I did not predict this, but we took a Hoyt AX3. We uh we took arrows from 340 spine to 200 spine, and we varied point weight from 125 all the way to 350. So we took that whole matrix, and every single one of those arrows, we were able to get to shoot a bullet hole out of that Hoyt hunting bow at 70 pounds, 28-inch draw or whatever it was, with just changing the XTS. We never moved the rest, not once, just the XTS. So every single one of those arrows shot out of the bow straight, which is kind of the metric of is this arrow properly spined for the bow, at
Yeah.
least in the past.
And
And not
each
only
each arrow was the same spine and length and all that?
same length and same spine in the class. So I think they were all cut to 27-inch carbon to carbon. So we had, 340 spines, 27-inch carbon to carbon with 125 to 350, whatever it was, up front, all the way through. So we had extremely weak dynamically arrows and extremely stiff dynamically arrows, and we got every single one of those to shoot out of the bow. In addition, when we looked at group sizes, as well as so I guess the first metric we looked at is just straight up group size. We shoot that thing, boom, 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 at 70 yards. How do they group? They all grouped very similar. There were slight changes, especially as you screwed on a fixed blade broadhead. There were slight variations in groups, and there were some kind of patterns that emerged, but they all shot reasonably well. It wasn't like, oh, the 340 spine with 350 up front shot a basketball, and the other one, the 250 spine shot a baseball or whatever. It was like, no, they all pretty much shot like a 2 to 3 inch group at 70 yards.
Mhm.
That's just like out of a shooting machine with the bow in tune, whatever. Then the question is, okay, yeah, well, that's a machine, duh. Like, of course they all shot good. What about when, I'm not a machine, I make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. So the question we asked there is how can we simulate shooter error? And the way we came up with is just with a torque. We thought about different ways of like, let's mimic face contact on the string. Let's mimic whatever. But we came up with just torque. It was the easiest to do. We attached like a pulley with a weight that torqued the bow in the exact same way every time. So when we torqued the bow, the impact point shifted in the way that we, torqued it, of course. But they still all shot good. And like just for frame of reference, this was like a 1-inch ish paper tear for all of these builds. That's like how much we were torquing it. So not crazy. Like if I'm shooting in the garage, I'm not paying attention. Like I could probably rip a 1-inch paper tear without,
Mhm.
just with doing a little bit of like hand torque type stuff. So like nothing crazy. But they still all shot good, and there were no outliers really in the sense of like how far they drifted. And then so we had this data of like all these different builds, basically like a matrix of builds, spine and point weight. And then it's like, can we identify a sweet spot? Is there a sweet spot for this bow? Like, is there an optimum in here? And we ran like, which this gets into like pretty crazy like statistic stuff. We ran a regression on this data set, which short version of a regression is the example on the website is like with houses. So if you wanted to ask a question like, how much increase in value do you add to a house if there's an extra bedroom, like in the real estate world? That's a kind of tough question to answer because usually there are other factors that correlate with the addition of a bedroom. Usually the house is bigger. Usually the house is in a maybe a better area, things like that. So you can't just separate the effect of what does just the additional bedroom have on the price of the house. And it's the same thing with our matrix of arrows is like you can't like as spine increased, total arrow weight went up. As point weight increased, total arrow weight went up. So you can't really just extract the one thing cleanly. So you have to run a statistical regression, which looks at everything kind of at once. And I guess the short version is there was no identifiable sweet spot in that whole matrix. The kind of headline result is stiffer always performed better, less point weight always performed better. So stiffer dynamically always performed better from a grouping perspective and not statistically as robust from a how far did the torque affect it perspective. And higher FOC always performed better because we also had another matrix of the same exact thing, but with with FMJ maxes. So a heavier GPI arrow. So then we could start to look at these arrows are the same weight kind of thing, but this one is higher FOC. So we had, I guess, a bigger matrix than just the one.
So to stop you right there, it seems like, you go on YouTube and guys talk about high FOC arrows. They're talking about heavy arrows. High FOC is where the center of mass, center of gravity is on that arrow, and the farther
Yep.
forward it is, the more FOC there is. It's not the total weight of the arrow does not mean FOC. So a high FOC arrow could be a light arrow, but that
Yes.
means you just have to have very little weight in the back of the arrow and more weight up in the front. So for anybody listening, that's what FOC is. It's not the total weight of the arrow.
Yes. Yeah. No. Exactly. You're right. Like yeah, and, like, so if you take a 5.0 with X amount of grains up front and you take an FMJ Max with X amount of grains up front, they can weigh the exact same. The 5.0 has higher FOC because more of the weight is in the front than the FMJ Max version. So, yeah, I'm not and I guess the short version of those results is let me just say that again. Stiffer spine was always better, lighter point weight was always better, and higher FOC was always better. So we have like a paradox. There's no way to increase the FOC and decrease the point weight and increase the spine at the same time. Like it's literally like it's a
Yeah.
paradox, which means there's like it's like everything is give and take. But that's what the regression showed with this big giant matrix bear. So it's not, there's no clean like just always add more point to your arrows because then you're decreasing the dynamic spine stiffness. You're increasing the point weight, which was not good. So that like the results are kind of like, well, okay, well, what do I do for my next arrow build? In theory, the only thing that you could get for free is a lighter GPI arrow. Like that's the one thing that showed like, oh, that's probably better from a performance perspective. But that comes with other issues because they're less durable. They might potentially have like less spine consistency, which is kind of I think pretty much everyone agrees that's a good thing. Like you look at like an AC C style shaft from Easton, like very spine consistent around the shaft. They tend to be
Why
heavier.
would a lighter weight arrow have less spine consistency?
No reason in particular, I guess.
They just tend to be that way, or
I wouldn't even say I wouldn't even say that necessarily. Like I haven't measured that. I'm just saying like an ACC shaft tends to be a little bit heavier,
I see.
but it like unrefutably they want like win the most stuff out of anything.
Yeah, yeah. The
So
aluminum adds consistency. Okay. So let's break some of those metrics down. Like, why is according to your test, why is a stiffer spine better? We'll start with that. Like, do you have any theories on that? Thoughts?
I don't think we can say with any degree of confidence why a stiffer spine would be better. I can hypothesize, like my guess is it's something to do with that a stiffer spine. Well, one, it just purely is going to flex less overall. So probably there's something like the less it flexes, the less variation there is in the flexing, meaning there's more accuracy. I think from a like resilience to shooter error perspective, well, that's maybe tricky too. Like, have you ever watched a slow-mo video of like an arrow getting launched out of like an out of tune bow, and how there's kind of like a there's kind of like a whip effect, for lack of a better term.
I see what you're saying.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's like the reason why, like, at least for me, like the intuitive way to move your rest to fix a paper tear is like backwards of
Yeah.
what it is. Like you move it further, like you move the tip further in the wrong way to fix it.
Mhm.
And it's because like as that arrow is in the power stroke, it like loads up, and then when the string releases it, it goes like boing and like
And
flings the
flings
other
it.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so l- the stiffer that is, the less the string can load that arrow up, meaning the less kind of whip effect it has. And I think that makes sense. Like if you took, well, I mean, we kind of saw with our stuff where the weaker spined ones tore worse with the same torque. So you torque the bow the exact same amount, which we could do in the shooting machine. You get a worse tear with the weaker ones because of that kind of whip effect. Like it loads up more and launches more, to the side. So there's probably something there too. There's also something probably to be said for the weaker arrow. At least this is the way I've kind of thought about it, which I don't think our data or our testing like supports this at all. But the way I've kind of thought about it is that the weak arrow maybe tends to like absorb your arrows better or errors better. Like it'll tend to like your errors as an archer will go into the flex of the arrow instead of just pushing the arrow off course or something like that, which is because you've
Yeah.
kind of heard like this thing where like, oh, a weak arrow is like more forgiving to a point kind of thing. That's kind of been a thing I feel like people have said. Again, like this is all just pure speculation. Like we can't really say one way or another, but these are just some ideas. It's the same thing with the point weight thing. I think the more point weight you add, one, the more that arrow's going to want to tend to load up if the power stroke isn't perfectly straight. So again, it goes back to that kind of like whip effect. It's also like the the arrow the string is pushing the arrow from behind, and you can kind of visualize this. Like if you were pushing like a stick with your hand and it had like a big old weight out at the front, it's going to be hard to like keep the back of that thing in like straight behind that point. Whereas if you just push like a stick without any weight up front, it'd be a lot easier to push that thing straight. So I think there's something there too, where like the more point weight there is up front, the more that back end tends to want to kind of squirm out on you, given a power stroke of the string that's not perfectly straight. Which again, all speculation is just kind of some of the ways I think about things. But the other thing we can't really refute at all is like the more FOC you have, meaning the further forward the center of mass is on the arrow, the more stable that arrow is in flight. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the like pros and cons of like why nothing is for free, and you have to kind of choose which poison you want to drink, kind of thing.
Yeah. As far as the spine goes, like I've really spent a lot of time like really, and again, like you say, it's a lot of speculation. But the way I've always looked at arrow spine is the stiffer the arrow, the less lateral flex and movement there is along that shaft as it's traveling downrange. The the whole point of launching an arrow out of a bow is to get it to go, forward, not side to side. The side to side movement is a kind of a side effect, a result of you pushing it forward. So, the way I look at it is that lateral movement is all extra. It's totally unnecessary to get your arrow from, the bow to the target. That lateral movement doesn't do anything other than be lateral movement in a compound bow. Now, when you weaken that arrow and you add in more lateral movement, because you're pushing on the back and it flexes more, I see it as from like a mechanical standpoint where a shooting machine is shooting the arrow. In my mind, I don't see any benefit for that machine to have an arrow that flexes more, right? Like we talked about how a lot of people think that the weaker arrow can like absorb any, shooter errors. I think that that can be true to a point, but I think there's a point where there gets to be so much lateral movement in that shaft that it almost becomes erratic, and that's the point where it goes from being what a lot of people would call optimum spine to being too weak. I think there's too much lateral movement, and it's trying to expel that energy, and it can be a little bit erratic. Is how I look at it. So, from a machine standpoint, in my mind, stiffer is going to be better. From a shooter standpoint, there's going to be that optimum point where there's the right amount of flex to, they say absorb the error, and there's kind of there's a point there. So a
Yeah.
lot of it's speculation, but that's kind of how I view it. And then
Kinda
you
gives
talk,
me an idea for, like, future testing would be to, like, shooter error is kind of inherently random to a point. Like, there's probably errors
yeah,
that, like, I tend to make consistently, and there's probably errors that you tend to make
the
consistently, but, like
biggest thing the biggest thing I think of is, shooter error is not just torquing the bow. Like I know a lot of shooter error, and like in the target world, you see a lot of guys, they'll be back there and then maybe it's windy or just their pin was holding low, and then you see them throw their bow. Like in my mind, the bow is moving as the string is traveling when they do something like that. And that's another kind of erratic thing that would
yeah,
be hard to replicate in a test, but it could be doable. But go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's that, there's just purely not breaking the shot when the pin's in the middle, like, the pin's somewhere else, which that's a whole different class of error, that's more like aiming error, I guess. There's Yeah, like variation how the release is positioned, there's variation in face contact, there's variation in how the hook of the release releases the D loop, like, there's all these things that are probably somewhat, random. There's probably like a bell curve of the errors that a specific archer makes, the error that they make on a particular shot somewhere in there. So, yeah, to probably test that, you'd have to simulate that randomness and see how that compares, like, I mean, figure out, like, okay, what are the types of shooter error? And then how can we simulate each one of them with the machine, and then apply a randomness knob to that so you
Yeah.
can change the degree of it and then shoot, enough groups and things to be statistically significant. But
Yeah. The
yeah, to your
first
point, I mean, it's entirely, that's totally plausible what you're saying, I think.
the first thing in my mind, when I get an arrow that is, I've always set up my arrows to be, according to like spine charts and stuff like that, to where they are at, what the spine charts call optimum spine, or programs called like Archer's Advantage call optimum spine, or slightly stiffer, or extremely stiff if I'm talking about like 2712s for indoor. But when I find an arrow that feels forgiving to me, it seems like what I notice is, when I have an arrow that is optimum spine or stiffer, I've never really shot an arrow that's weaker than spine charts call optimum spine. But when I shoot one that's optimum or stiffer, it pretty much always hits the middle if my pin breaks in the middle, unless there's other factors like I torqued the bow that time or something like that. But when I have an arrow that's forgiving, it hits the middle when my pin is not in the middle, or what I would deem forgiving. And I think that that's because, in my head, the way I think about it is that that arrow receives kind of like English. A lot of people call English like when people throw their bow. I don't like to throw my bow. I don't do much of that. But when my pin's dancing around in the middle of the target, and maybe it comes out of the center, and then it's on its way back. Well, the shot breaks when it's down here, but it's on its way back to the center, and maybe like how well an arrow receives that English and actually goes back to the middle, or if it, shoots out to the side. So, then there's the factor of speed. The slower your arrow, the more it's going to, the longer it's going to be on the string for you to, fling it out to the side, up, down, left, right. So that's kind of a big factor that I think about. When I have a forgiving arrow, it hits the middle when my pin is not in the middle, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. And then you're talking about FOC, like, yeah, you're absolutely right. And, the study shows it. The higher FOC, the more stable it's going to be in flight. You can look at, other industries like, rockets and whatever else there are, like what is it, the center of pressure. the farther away it is from the center of mass, the more
Yep.
stable that object's going to be. So that's definitely kind of a proven thing as well. But what other metrics were we talking about?
I mean, I think that's pretty much the gist of it. I mean, obviously, the other like lever you can pull on to change how far back the center of pressure is how big your vanes are, basically, or how efficient your vanes are at steering. So we also looked at vanes. I think the conversation around vanes and I guess broadheads too is how can we minimize drag? Drag meaning how fast does that arrow slow down? That's pretty much always a bad thing. We don't want the arrow to like be losing more speed than it needs to, while still giving the quote unquote steering that it needs. And those are two distinct forces from an aerodynamics perspective. In aerodynamics, aerodynamic drag is how fast does the arrow slow down given the kind of aligned like force, the force that's like directly against the direction of motion. And then lift, which is a stupid name because it makes you think of like airplanes and wings and like
Mm.
how an airplane goes up, which is not exactly, it's similar, but it's not exactly what we're talking about. It's the force is perpendicular to the arrow, meaning like if the arrow is not flying straight, how does the vane like restore it to flying straight? Like how fast does it go back to being straight? And like the vane is the other primary thing you can change to change those two things. And there's in vanes, I would say like, well, my stance forever has kind of been like veins are all pretty similar and shoot whatever the one you thinks looks cool that is durable and sticks and doesn't like have bad memory. And like to me, a lot of those other things are more important to me than eking out like a tiny bit of like aerodynamic performance differences.
Mm.
Because I've had like hunts where like I'm crawling for like a mile with my bow with the quiver down, and like I get there and like half of my arrow's veins that were on the ground side are like starting to peel off a little bit and stuff, which I don't know what was up that year. I couldn't get veins to stick for the life of me. But so like some of that, or just memory, like you've been sitting your bow down, or you have arrows in a case, and now all the veins are like flat, and you gotta like set them out in the heat for a while to get them to come back. So some of that to me is more important than, especially from a hunting perspective, is more important to me than like, is this vein 2% more aerodynamically efficient? But there are real gains to be had. Like there are definitely styles of veins, types of veins, shapes of veins that perform better. And there's all the charts and stuff on the website that shows some of the kind of outliers. But I think for the most part, like they're all similar enough where the vast as long as the vein is properly sized for your application and the type of like broadhead you're shooting or the type of arrow that you're trying to steer, if it's a target arrow relative to where the center of mass is and like all of those things, like the differences are pretty small. And I mean, and that's why you see like there isn't one style of vein that every target archer shoots, even the best, like right next to each other, shooting the same scores, winning the tournaments with totally different vein setups. Like there's not one clear, winner, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that, the Arrow Ballistics Study this year or past years that has kinda, taught you and made you change your arrow setup?
So I'm personally in a kind of a weird spot in life right now. We had our first kid in 2024, and then we had twin boys last September. So I have like three under, well, our oldest just turned two a couple months ago. So I have three under almost two. So archery has, and with the business, and I still work like a real job and all that too. So like I'm busy.
Yeah.
And I just switched to this winter, I switched to lefty because I've had some like, shoulder issues in my left shoulder to where like basically I can't hold good. And I fought it for years. And this winter I was so sick of it, of shooting bad, that I didn't shoot terrible, like fine, like I mean whatever, definitely not like, competitive professional level, but like enough to win local leagues and stuff like that, I guess. But I've just been sick of it, so I switched to lefty. So I am all kinds of screwed up right now. I obviously trying to learn the whole lefty thing and trying to shoot. I've been starting to shoot a little bit more now. We just got our shed. I have a shed out here that I'm not moved into yet that has like an indoor 20-yard range. So I've been able to go out at night after all the kids go to bed and just shoot like some Vegas games. And try to figure out the lefty stuff a little bit. But so my arrows right now are just whatever I can throw together and make a dozen that I can lose in the grass and stuff like that and break. But I think for me, I really don't think my builds are gonna change a whole lot from what they've been, like, at least from a hunting perspective. Like, I've always kind of been on that kind of, like, happy medium, like, I really like, being somewhere around 300 feet per second for my hunting bow, somewhere in the 415 to 450 neighborhood kinda weight-wise. So I think that's all gonna hold. I would like to find a lighter GPI shaft that's still durable. And there's a lot of them. Like, I haven't really messed around with too many really light shafts just because of the durability thing, but I wanna get a handful of different kinds. I've never really messed with the 5.0s. I'm actually shooting Sonics, 6 mils right now,
Mm,
and I like those. I think for, like, Western hunting, I'd probably hedge down to a 5 mil. So, I think I'm gonna try the 5.0s. I might try some of the Victory. I'm wearing an Easton shirt right now, for the record. But I might try some of the Victory lighter stuff. I know the durability can be an issue with some of those too. I think that's just kind of the name of the game is like they just get fragile, and I hate breaking arrows, which don't shoot groups like an idiot. Well, I like to shoot groups, and I tend to break a lot of arrows, which gets really annoying. So yeah, which obviously like I have been shooting like pins and stuff for the last handful of years, even for hunting, and that really helps on the breaking arrow side. And I don't really worry about it too much from like in an animal. Like, yeah, a lot of arrows break if you happen to go through a shoulder or, stick in the offside shoulder or something, like, yeah, an arrow will break in the animal. I don't really worry too much about that. It's more just for the practicing side of it of like, I just hate cracking arrows.
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I mean, I think maybe try to go to a lighter GPI shaft. My draw length is also quite a bit different now since switching to lefty. With my right shoulder, I could not get like good extension on it. Like my shoulder always kind of like wasn't, I don't know, not in an optimal position. So I actually went up in draw length like an inch, inch and a half from what I've
Oh,
always shot righty. It's
yeah,
really weird. Like it's pretty bizarre, but and I've kind of like the last few weeks I've went up like a half inch every couple weeks. I like shoot it for a while and then like, oh, my shoulder's even like more nice and down and extended. And then I have to go up a little bit more. But I think I'm finally where I'm gonna be. So I don't know. It'll probably be similar to what I've always shot. Hedging on the lighter GPI side of things with a reasonable amount of point weight up front. Probably I'm usually in the 150-ish neighborhood, anywhere between 140 and 170, probably for my hunting build. Obviously, like for me, durability of that, of like the component system, I really like to hit with a collar. That's kind of been my go-to forever. I
okay,
cannot stand half outs or
yeah,
anything like that. I tried last year, obviously, well, like we just had our twins. So I did not do a single Western hunt last year. I only hunted whitetails very casually, like a night here, a night there kind of thing. I can actually hunt right out here in my backyard. Now we move. Oh yeah, and we moved last summer too into a
yeah,
new house, and I like remodeled this whole basement and everything was all on finish. So yeah, been a pretty crazy time. So yeah, I just did some real casual whitetail hunting, and I used half outs, and I decided I will never use half outs again. Just too many bending and stuff like that. I didn't have any like
yeah,
bad situations on animals, but just doesn't feel good.
yeah. And they
Um,
they always pull out of targets hard too. I don't know. I don't like
yeah,
shooting
I
it.
mean the collars do too. I don't like pulling collars out of targets
Really?
either. But, yeah, depending especially like a well, bags for sure. I'm kinda spoiled now, I have those Archery 365 targets, which
Mhm.
are super soft foam, like, you can almost pull those out with 2 fingers.
Yeah,
So I don't mind those too much. I'd shoot anything into those targets. But in the shop, I have, like, a big old one of the big block, like, range targets, and everything
mhm.
pulls hard out of those, so except for
Yeah,
aluminums. Aluminums are nice.
yeah, yep,
Uh, but, yeah, anyway, yeah, I think I'm very much like a kinda I mean, I'm very much in the camp of everything is a trade-off. Depending on the application, either one of the extremes is probably not gonna be great. I tend to land somewhere in the middle on pretty much everything personally.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's funny. So, kind of as far as that goes, my dad, he's always been the lightest possible arrow he could build. Like, he's got a 28.5 inch draw length, 29-inch draw length, and shoots 70 pounds and shoots a like 297 grain arrow.
Wow.
Like insanely light. Like he's shooting in the 350s. and he
Holy
loves it.
cow.
Yeah, he loves it because he can misjudge an elk at 40 yards by 10 yards and still kill it like easy. And the crazy part is like, everybody talks about a lightweight arrow, like not having any penetration. Like he passed through a bull elk with a frontal shot, came out here and came out its rear end like all the way through with the
Yeah.
297 grain arrow. So
What kind of
that it's an interlock broadhead. I don't know if you heard of them. They're actually like the machining is like super tight. Like I've tried so many fixed blade broadheads and it's always a pain in the butt to get them to tune. These ones, like, I don't know what it is. I don't know if they just, I know they're pretty small, like 1 inch cut is the ones that he's using. They make different sizes.
Yeah.
But they're they must not have very much like drag on them or something, because they like have always shot really easy. Like it's funny, I tried this other broadhead that was about similar size, kind of a big name brand, and I went out and shot at like 15 yards, and that broadhead hit this, deer 3D target in the leg, the back leg. I'm like, what the heck is this? And then I threw on one of those other broadheads and it hit it like right in the vitals. I'm like, what in the world? So I don't know, but that's the broadhead he's shooting. I think they're like 85 grains, and then he's got, like a 10, 15 grain insert. So, he's only got 9,500 grains worth of point weight up there. But so FOC is probably low FOC. I know he's got to have bigger, bigger like high profile veins to get him to fly good. But I don't know. He shoots them good. And I've always erred on the lighter side too. If I can get under 400 grains, I'm pretty happy. 350, 400 is kind of where I like to be.
Yeah. So I guess one interesting thing that we found this year, and this is kind of a little side quest, is we wanted to, because one thing you always hear everywhere on the internet is that, oh, like there's a, fixed blade broadheads you really like that like 280, 270 neighborhood. Oh, once you get over 290 or 300, fixed blade broadheads are just, they're just not as accurate or whatever. Like they get squirrely. And so we tested it. We tested like an 80-pound bow with Easton 5.0s. It was going like 330 ish, and then we did all the same arrows out of a lighter bow at 285 or whatever it was, somewhere in that neighborhood, somewhere like a 40 foot per second swing. And both from the perspective of just straight up group size and from the perspective of we torqued the bow, so it's tearing, there was like no difference in either how much the fixed blade broadheads drifted from the field points or in just overall group size. So I would be a lot less hesitant now to shoot a faster bow with the broadhead from a like forgiveness perspective. We just did not see that at all. The other thing I would say is like I love the range forgiveness of those light setups. Depending on the hunt, maybe, but definitely consider going lighter. Like I'm not one that worries about penetration, like really at all. Like I have really ever like I've really never had a penetration issue on any animal ever. Like out of I don't even know how many, like dozens and dozens of things over the years, like really never a real issue that wasn't just me shooting something in a stupid spot.
Hmm.
So I do not sweat, and pretty much all mechanicals, pretty much all big mechanicals. So I like do not I'm not a person who's like sweating penetration at all. I do not believe I believe the number one factor is the broadhead for sure. Like a small fixed blade's gonna for sure penetrate better than a 2 inch
Yes.
anything. So I think that's number one. I think number two is just how much energy you have total. Not necessarily like not the weight, like the energy is in like and like the energy is pretty much constant regardless of what arrow you shoot. Meaning like the energy that's getting put into the arrow is the amount of energy you're putting into the bow. So if you have a longer draw length, if you're pulling more weight, all of those sorts of things, your arrow has more energy. The number one driver, I think, to penetration overall, like above and beyond momentum and like bone breaking thresholds and all of the things that people say, it's just energy. The more energy you have, the more that arrow is going to want to penetrate.
So
And that's why, like, I think like Joel Maxfield has done the test, right? Where like he shoots a heavy arrow and a light arrow out of the same bow into a foam target and they penetrate the same, which, and whether or not a foam target's a good representation of an animal, it's not, but it still gives you an idea like, it's the energy. That's what it's like, the
so
energy and the friction that
the way my third grade science teacher explained it to me is, like if you look at the pendulum, when you go up, when the ball is swinging and it goes up to the top. It's at the top of its swing. It's got the most potential energy, but no kinetic energy. And then as it's swinging down, it's got more kinetic energy and less potential energy. And then, it reverses as it goes back up. And the way I think about it, it's the same thing as an arrow. And tell me if I'm wrong, because you know better than I would. A heavy arrow, yes, it might have more, weight behind it. And a lot of people say that it's going to penetrate more because it's got more weight, but it's also going slower. So it's got less. So this also doesn't make sense to me. People say that heavy arrows have more kinetic energy. In my mind, like from the pendulum thing, it's got the most kinetic energy when it's going the fastest, not when it's got the most weight. So can you explain that to me a little bit?
Yeah, so when you draw a bow back, you're storing energy in the limbs and, well, basically in the limbs. When you release the arrow, all that energy or most of the energy within like the efficiency of the bow gets transferred into the arrow. And like the way you can understand the energy that you're storing is like the draw force curve. So
Yep.
like how much weight are you pulling as you draw it back? The area under that curve is how much energy you're storing in the bow. And then I think with like modern compounds, they're somewhere in like the 90 efficiency range. So
Yep.
90% of the energy that you're storing is going into the arrow, give or take. So as soon as you release that arrow and that arrow is through the power stroke and at full speed, it has like all of the energy that has been stored minus the efficiency loss due to like sound and vibration and all that is in the arrow as kinetic energy. So regardless of what arrow you shoot, it's getting the same amount of kinetic energy. So the heavier arrow is going slower, but it's heavier. So it's like kinetic energy is 1/2 velocity mass times velocity squared, I guess. So
Okay.
that's like or whatever it is. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. So yes, it's going slower, but it's heavier, and that all balances out to equal the same amount of kinetic energy, minus tiny efficiency differences. So a heavier arrow does tend to absorb the energy from the bow better, which is why, the bow might be a little bit quieter and the bow might be a little bit less vibratey or whatever
Yeah.
with a heavier arrow. That's just because the efficiency gets a little bit better. Now, with modern compounds, that's very, very minimal. Much, much different than from like an old recurve or even an old compound. Modern compounds are very efficient at getting energy even into light arrows.
I know, like,
Uh,
as far as like mechanical systems in general, I know compound bows are like the peak efficiency out of like any industry. Like, I don't know if there's any other mechanical system that's as efficient as a modern compound bow. Just
yeah,
like fun fact there. But
yeah. Well, yeah, they've had a lot of decades now of trying to eke out every little tiny bit, and it seems like they've kind of hit a plateau. Obviously, like something's going to have to fundamentally change to get any better. But yeah, for sure. So yeah, at the end of the day, like at launch, those arrows have the same amount of kinetic energy. Now, as they fly, in theory, if you move the target out far enough, by the time they get there, the heavier arrow is going to have retained more of that energy because they're both losing energy due to drag as they fly. So there is a tiny advantage to the heavier arrow from how much energy does it actually have when it gets to the elk. It's not a lot. This is one of the things you can compare in our like arrow weight optimization thing in the build section is you can look at like if I shoot a 500 grain versus a 400 grain, how much energy do they actually have at 80 yards, for example. The difference
yeah,
isn't a whole lot. There is a difference. So in theory, there's that. And then once it hits the thing that you're shooting at, I believe, again, don't quote me on the physics stuff. I'd have to look it up to be sure, but I believe the terminology would be that kinetic energy then is being converted into work, which is force times distance. So energy out of the bow into the arrow into work once it gets to the target, which is force times distance. So the biggest lever you can change is how much force does it take to penetrate, meaning fixed blade broadhead, small fixed blade broadhead. Obviously, like opening a mechanical is also a thing that takes some of the energy out of that arrow. So then once it hits and it's penetrating, it's just like how much kind of work can it do before it's out of energy, and all the energy has been transformed into work. So there isn't really a big fundamental like from a pure physics in like a perfect model world. There isn't really a huge gain from the penetration side from like momentum. Like momentum isn't really in that fundamental equation. Now there is now it's a little bit weird because there's, like, an elasticity kind of component to, like, animals, like, the stuff is kinda, like, bouncy, I guess, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term, like, there's kinda some stuff there. There's bone and, you know, is a heavier arrow more apt to punch through bone kind of thing? Because it kinda has to, like, overcome, like, a and I don't know what the exact terms would be, but there's like, it has to, like, be able to break through that bone, so there's probably some gains there, and I think it would take some pretty rigorous like, it's really a hard thing to test. In the rifle world, they have, like, you know, whatever, the fancy ballistics gel that is all super calibrated and it's kept at the perfect temperature that they can compare, like, bullets, like, side by side by side. For arrows, it's much trickier because, like, you can't just shoot an arrow into ballistic gel because of, like, the friction and the differences in like, between actual tissue and the gel. So, like, I think one thing that'd be really interesting for someone to do is to figure out how can we simulate an animal well. Like, people have
Yeah.
tried with, like, hide and plywood and, like, different things like this, and that's probably good, but there's probably some way we could actually compare things in an apples
Sounds
to apples way.
sounds like a good job for the Arrow Ballistics Study to figure out over the next few
We
years.
we've thought about it. I don't know I don't know what exactly it would have to look like, but there's gotta be there has to be some way to do it. So, yeah, all that to say, I mean, yeah, like, in theory, there probably is a penetration gain from a heavier arrow, like, to some degree. I don't know what that degree is. But I personally, with the energy that I have, just due to my draw length and weight and all that, like, I don't sweat it. Now, if I was setting up a bow for a kid at 30 pounds, I might start to think about it a little more. Not necessarily on the arrow weight side because they're they're gonna need to shoot a pretty light arrow to get any amount of speed to even be able to shoot, but definitely from the broadhead side. Like, I would definitely be a lot more apt to pick a tiny little fixed blade type broadhead instead of, like, the normal thing that I would shoot. But yeah, it's a and obviously that's a s it's a hot topic as a lot of these topics are, but,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Well, this has been a good podcast. We talked about a lot of different topics. I le- yeah, we didn't. Well, we did a little bit at the beginning, but yeah, I learned a lot. I think we put into words some good concepts. I know kind of helped like sort things out in my head a little bit better, but that definitely was a plus. How can people get in touch with you with Precision Cut if they've got questions or about the Arrow Ballistic Study or whatever? Like, what's a good way to get a hold of you?
yeah, so we have a contact page on our website. We have, like, tech support, email. You can shoot us a message on Instagram, on Facebook. I stay on top of all those still. It's getting harder, but I still try to stay on top of that stuff. Pretty much, you know, pretty responsive on in all of those channels. Yeah, that's those are the main things.
Perfect, perfect. Well, I appreciate your time and glad we finally got to do a podcast. I think this has been a very good one. I learned a lot.
Yeah, man, we made it through. I can keep the website up and keep my Instagram, and we can keep doing it.
There we go. Perfect. Awesome. Well, you have a good one, Tristan. We will see you on the next episode.
All right, man. Take care.